Well, my brother started working in comics, and he was doing various companies, and then he heard of EC, and he liked it there, and he was doing, I guess, the bulk of his work there for a while. And they got dissatisfied with the coloring that was being provided by the company that printed the plates for the, as most comic book outfits had their plates printed at this company, Chemical Color in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And they would send the artwork up there, and they would send back what they called silver prints and for me to color. But before then, they would do the coloring on a lot of the early Crime Patrol and the Love books and the cowboy books that they did before I was around. And when Harvey came, he was very interested in having accuracy and more artsy coloring, and so was Al for his horror books. They were beginning to take off, and they wanted to have a good quality of everything, and they had good quality stories, they had good quality pencil inking, so forth, and design. And so my brother said, "Oh, you're unhappy. I bet my sister could do that stuff. She's coming along." So it wasn't really nepotism, because they would have fired me at the drop of a hat if I wasn't any good. But I because my whole family was artistic, I could handle it. And I knew what they wanted, and I was starting out, so I was very interested in doing a good job. And then I got the whole line to color. Isn't that nice? No, it was the subject matter was fun to work with, really, and I learned a lot. And Harvey, the first story I did, I remember my brother came home and he says, "Harvey liked your stuff." He says, "You're the first person that didn't color the moon yellow." And I said, "What moon? I don't even remember the moon in the story." But you know, the moon to me, and only on special times is there a yellow moon. But I used the color, used the white of the paper, as awful as the paper was in those days, as a color, white. So that's what I did. But there was little things like that I was a little more thoughtful in evaluating the depths of pictures, because I had a somewhat artistic training. And I did go to cartoonist and illustrator school for a short time, but most of my schooling was from my father and my brother, of course. Okay. My mother could draw too, but it was mostly my dad with the painting and so forth. Oh, right. Well, when I first met him, good vibes. And of course, he didn't have the big beard or anything. He was just a guy, you know, a little heavy set. And they were very polite, you know, tie and shirt guys. You know, maybe they rolled up once in a while. But in those days, in the 50s, men dressed, and women, you went to work with heels on. That's why most of us turned out with bad feet if we continued working. But yeah, it was a regular business office. You could have been downtown or uptown or anything. It was just an office, and nobody looked slobby or anything. I'm not saying they look slobby today, but you know what I mean. Nobody came in short, ripped off dungarees, or it wasn't the style. The only one that was very, very casual was Williamson, because he was out playing ball with Frazetta and Torres and all his other friends, you know, and he'd come in, you know, they come in with the bat, you know, and come in, I'm going to do this, you know, and they were the kids, so.
Okay.
Yeah, and Bill was always cordial and very polite, and you just got the idea that he was the boss, but he didn't project like, "Don't fool around with me." You know, it wasn't like that. He wasn't officious. He was very easygoing, nice, and he told you what he wanted, you know. But there was a freedom there, as Al spoke of at the convention the other day, that Al gave a lot of freedom to his artists and stuff. And so did Harvey to a great extent, but Harvey would do layouts on the stories, so he had more, but he was more artsy-fartsy in his stuff, his art, and even his war stuff, he wanted exactly the way, accurate and everything, while Al's was more fantasy orientated, science fiction, and horror can be. You can have a wonderful, terrible, horrible murder in a mansion in the 1890s or right on 42nd Street. So, you know, you can do it any way you want. Not that you would change the story, but I'm saying he wouldn't tie you down to accuracy. Like it would have to be a 1953 New York City cab in the story. You know, you could fool around. Family, okay, yeah, I suppose so. I felt very comfortable with them. I thought they were my friends, pals. I could ask them, I could ask questions of my boss. I could ask Feldstein and Harvey or Bill. I don't understand this, and you didn't feel like you were charging and interrupting anything, or that you were taking their time. They were really generous in explaining. I learned a lot. And I learned a work ethic. Not only was my family that way, orientated that way, they were a bit old-fashioned, but which was good, I think. But The Office was too. And Al Feldstein, he never wasted a minute. And yet you could stop and say, Al, how do I scale something down? I don't know how to do this. And he'd say, okay, Marie, you should know that already, you know. All right. And with Bill too, you could, I didn't know, or I'm sorry, or you know, something. But they were fun to be with. And Harvey too. Harvey was a delight. He was a delight when he would be talking about it, telling you a cartoon or a joke, or telling what he's going to do in a story. He would suddenly turn from this gnome type figure, a little serious, into this elf, and he'd be dancing around. He was funny. It reminded me later on, Stan Lee would do that, and he wouldn't be cutesy humor stuff, but Stan would jump on top of desks and stuff to tell you a story. Later on, he didn't do that. He was too busy when the books really took off at Marvel. But Harvey was like that. He would act out these things, and he looked like his drawings. He looked like them, and you were just charmed by the whole thing. You couldn't help but like him, even if he was so autocratic with when he wanted the work done. You didn't mind, because you knew deep down he was just as nutty as you were, you know. So that was one aspect. Al was great to work with, too. I really enjoyed him. You know, they say I'm the censor, and that really, I would never blot out artwork, but I was afraid with some of them when they'd have someone, well, I don't know whether it would be a case of disembowelment, but it would be pretty disgusting if you colored the gunk coming out of somebody. And so I would color blue, or if somebody's head was, you know, the brains falling out, well, you know, you color it blue. And somebody said later it probably saved us from even more blasting because people didn't notice it as much. But the kids did. They knew what was under there. And I didn't color anything to obliterate, just to tone it down a little, that when Mom found the comic, she didn't see the eyeball hanging out or something, you know. And, you know, and it was tongue-in-cheek with the kids. It was the grim fairy tales, you know. And it was thrilling because everybody was beginning to be a little stiff, you know, in those days, in the 50s. And EC was loose. So that was good. But anyway, Graham Mangles, for instance, would color a cover, and sometimes his watercolors were so too intricate or too detailed or too refined for the interpretation of the primitive coloring we had then. We didn't have computers. They had to do this all on metal and moires up there, you know, and it took a long time, and we didn't have that much time. And they could only charge a certain amount of money, I suppose. It was 10-cent book. And sometimes I'd have to recolor those. For the most part, all the insides, and for the most part, I would say at least 3/4 of all the covers from that period on. Maybe more, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. They all look good. Wally Wood would drive me absolutely crazy, but because from page to page he would color, like you'd have a bandolier or a button or a scarf on a guy, and the next page the scarf is gone, the bandolier is running this way, and the belt buckle is over here, there's a round on one page. But the end result, well, what I ended up doing, I'd read the whole story twice and make sure, this, and this, that's not there, So I wouldn't color them a glaring color the first time, I'd color them all brown, so that if he shifted where they were, because they didn't edit that much, they didn't care with it. Harvey did, but on the science fiction and on the historical and horror books, the guy could have the pattern on his tie or not, you know, if nobody bothered mixing it up. But the favorite, Woody was very satisfying because his inking was so sexy-like. He had shadows and glitzy and, you know, lovely-looking whoopie-doo ladies, you know. And you'd work a little harder on it, but it came out glitzy. Even in those primitive, what you had the tools to work with, it came out looking really glitzy. And the kids, I think he was one of the fan favorites. Davis was very easy to color, very much like the Jack Kirby that I colored many years later, because his blacks were so powerful, you could hardly ruin the story, but you could aid the mood of it by bringing things forward and back. But because the blacks were so strong, you had to be a moron to do it wrong. Woody was great. Davis was very easy. Severin was good, but naturally he was good. He's my brother. And I had to be accurate with him because all his stuff was accurate. But it was fun to color because it was like coloring I'm not as good as he is, but we are similar in our techniques. So I enjoyed that a lot. Graham Engels, really a riot because I'd be chuckling as I was doing the stuff. It's so hideous, you know. Very moody if you felt. What I liked about it was what the readers, I think, liked, that in a book you got 4 different artists in some cases, and it was all different moods, so you never got bored coloring. It was all the different stories, 6 pages of this, 6 pages of history. Orlando was good to color. Williamson, the science fiction, and Krigstein, he too. You wanted to do it science fiction-y, but I hadn't seen that much of it. But what we were striving for is what the Star Wars people got later on. That was what we knew, what we wanted to see in space, you know, and the imagination was there. Inking was very good on the science fiction artist, and Williamson was fun to color, but it was hard sometimes because he put so much work in it, and you didn't want to obliterate. One splash page he had on a jungle scene on a foreign planet, on a heavenly place. Trees and vines and blah, 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 and then, of course, the bingo, shiny spaceship. And this jungle scene was so gorgeous that I thought, if I put colors on this crappy paper that we have, and the printing is so primitive, if it's off register, I colored the whole thing in pale yellow so you could see all the inking work. And everybody thought, oh, you colored the whole splash in practically all yellow except the spaceship. I said, yeah, but you can see it. You see, and that's why they liked the thoughtfulness of it. The writers try to help the story, the artists did, and last little old me, I saw fortunately for me too, I saw the quality of what I was working with and tried to add to it by not overdoing anything. You know, did I cover all the artists? I didn't mind any of them, but Woody was hard because I had to follow up what he was doing, you know. And Williamson, sometimes you had to be very careful not to obliterate anything because he had all this diddly-do going on. But they were all fun to color because of the variety, you know. I could color Davis is the fastest for some reason. Oh, and Johnny Craig, his stuff. And now here's Mr. Neat, Mr. Clean. His stuff, it was so, and Kamen too, nice clean stuff that when it got horrible, that was fun too, because sometimes that was difficult because they draw it and almost looked like advertising art. You know, and the next guy come along would be Graham Engels, where everybody was wearing, you know, smelly wool and old 4,000-year-old satin, you know. Well, Mr. Fifth Avenue, Johnny Craig, you know, his stuff was neat and clean until he was chopping up his wife. The kids loved it. And I enjoyed Mad was a riot to do. Sometimes Mad was very difficult because if Elder would put all these gobbledygook things, these little jokes and eyeballs popping in, or a jar of olives that was eyeballs or things like that. And if you colored everything, you'd be lost of the story continuity. And a lot of kids told me that they would read the story first and then go back and look at all the funny stuff, you know. So I colored that way too. I didn't want to highlight too much with all the details because it would distract from the story. Read the story and the punchline. And if you notice, the humor was written with great brevity, which is the best way to do it. You know, while the science fiction with the Ray Bradbury adaptations, Feldstein was locked into heavy text, like he said at the con yesterday. Some of the artists say the panel would be like this big, and you'd have the guy looking through the text was just 2 eyes looking at him.
Tomorrow.
I came back to comics after the Comics Code had sort of shook up the industry and people were wandering around bumping into doors. And I went back to Stan Lee just to pick up some freelance, and I was put on staff, which was fine. It was great. And I worked there a couple of months, and then when Ditko left Doctor Strange, I think Bill Everett did one or two, and then I took over. I think Everett did one. I'm not sure if I went directly from Ditko to it myself. I think I might be thinking of another thing. Hulk, I was thinking of. Anyway, I filled in, and that was good. But if I might mention beforehand, they discovered, Stan knew I could draw, but he never really looked at my portfolio. He needed somebody desperately for the production. And one time they were having a thing on the colleges in Esquire magazine, and they were doing a feature in the book about how the college campuses are thinking in pop art and costumes and superheroes and the dope and the bing and the bong, and they wanted somebody to illustrate that, and they wanted, I think they asked for Jack Kirby, but I think Saul Brodsky, thought Kirby would be late on something, which would, Kirby was so fast, and he said, why don't you go over and see if they'll use you, and they did. I did 5 pages, and when Martin Goodman, who owns Marvel, saw it, he said, what is she doing paste ups? Put her on a book. Ditko leaves, I get the book, and all of a sudden I'm in the comics, which was fine, you know, but I never was chasing after this stuff because I just, I like the work, and I always entertain myself in my private life by drawing. You know, I enjoy doing cartoons with my friends more than I enjoy working. You know, I think most people are like that when you're doing your own stuff. So, but then from there, I did the Hulk, and I followed, I think, Everett or Buscema on that. That was hard because Buscema is absolutely fantastic, and he's anatomically so correct. He's the Michelangelo of the business. Anyway, and I did Submariner after Buscema left that. I think he was going on to The Surfer at that time, and then I did the Submariner for some issues. And so I got around, you know, but they're hard guys to follow because I was my inking looked like the caveman stone stuff, you know. But I was learning, and I enjoyed it. I had the spirit of it, and I think that's what saved me. I had the spirit of the superhero, and the action, and the moving of the bodies, and the guts.